All right, Manny, go ahead and play the video I sent you regarding the Shroud of Turin.
I haven't gotten it yet.
Oh, you haven't?
No. What's so slow? See here.
Pastor Bert, is it the one you sent yesterday?
No, it's actually a different one.
Okay.
Yeah.
You can send it to me. I can help. I can still manage.
Oh, can you? Okay. So, Manny, you still haven't received it? Huh?
No, I've got it on my phone, but not on the desktop.
Oh, okay. So it's on your phone.
Yes.
Okay.
You
Do you want to continue or do you want me to pass it on?
Pass it on. Go ahead.
Okay. I'll pass it on. Princess, I hope and pray that you're feeling better.
Yeah, I took the medicines already, Pastor, but this has been going on for like 4 days now.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, we'll continue to pray that God gives you the peace and the strength to deal with this.
Pastor.
And you know, whenever we're dealing with health issues, you know, the only thing we can do is turn to the Lord and seek his healing and trust that you know, he's gonna pull you through this. So let me just acknowledge everybody that's here so far. Well, Princess, you got the video already, right? Christopher is here, Diane, Daniel, and Anna, Sister Dina in her garden. I thought I'd make you smile. Andrea, Kevin, Manny, Ophelia, Princess. So everybody is here that up to this point, we're gonna check out this Shroud of Turin. It's asking the question, or the point of this video is to ask the question, what happened to Jesus's burial cloth? Whatever happened to his burial cloth? Right? We were talking about where the graveyard or where the tomb was, two possible locations. Okay, but the burial cloth, that you can take with you. And so here it is, right here. Here, the title is Shocking Evidence That Proves the Shroud of Turin Shows the Actual Face of Jesus. Now, in studying this, there's like I said, 102 disciplines, experts who have studied this and combining all their information together based on their, you know, their expertise. You know, they come to this conclusion. And so it's interesting, but it's not your object of faith. I just want to make that clear. This is not your object of faith, right? Your object of faith will always be the risen Christ. But this is interesting that this is out there. So go ahead and play it.
A growing number of scholars and scientists believe that the image that you see on the screen right now is the very face of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. As a matter of fact, each one of these notes corresponds precisely with the crucifixion story found in the Gospels of Jesus Christ himself. The question is the Shroud of Turin the authentic grave clothes in which Jesus was wrapped and buried, or is it the most elaborate hoax in archaeological history? Hey, my friends, I am back with my friend and brother, Dr. Jeremiah Johnston. And hey, guys, a little while ago, we did a video on the top 10 biblical archaeological discoveries of all time. And number 10 on that list was none other than the Shroud of Turin. And at the end of that video, I asked you guys a question. Do you want Dr. Jeremiah and I'm going to call him Dr. J, all right, to come back and do a specific video on the Shroud of Turin? And undoubtedly, Jeremiah, again and again and again, I'd say about 60% of the comments on that video on the YouTube channel said, y'all need to do another video specifically on the Shroud of Turin. So, brother, I'm excited. You are back. You have done your research. Man, I'm excited to talk about the Shroud of Turin.
It's so exciting, and we're also dropping some high-resolution photos courtesy of the photo documenter himself, Barry Schwartz, who's given us exclusive permission for your audience on The Beat to see some pictures that very few people in the world have seen. So they're in for a real treat.
Man, I am so very excited. So guys, we don't want to waste your time. We want to jump right in. Now, we don't want to assume that you guys even know what a shroud is, right? So let's just first and foremost start with the basics to make sure we don't lose anybody. What is a shroud in general? We'll talk about the Shroud of Turin in just a moment, but what is a shroud for those who may not even know what that word means?
Absolutely. In fact, they're still used today. It's really a linen burial garment. And when we look at the Shroud of Turin, it is a linen cloth containing the front and back images of a crucified man that, Alan, as you said in the entering monologue, matches the biblical description of Jesus and the wounds he sustained in his crucifixion.
All right. So you talked about an image. Let's just give the people a little snapshot, a little preview of what the Shroud of Turin actually looks like. So guys, what you are seeing on the screen is what?
Check this out, Alan. The image scrolling across the screen right now is the very image of a crucified man. We see the front side on the left, the back side on the right, because his entire body was draped. And the wounds, as you're about to show, reflect exactly what we read about in the historical biblical Gospels.
Wow, guys. So as you can see, guys, this is absolutely amazing. We could very well be looking at the face, the body of Jesus Christ himself. And we're going to give you 5 reasons today why we are convinced that this is true. But before we get there, this next image that you're going to see right here, guys, is what you saw at the intro of this video. And there's more here. Okay, this is just one part of it. But what you're seeing here is each one of these notes right here corresponds to a specific aspect of the crucifixion story, where maybe they pierced him in his side, or they beat him on his head, or crown of thorns, or those different things. And so what's amazing about this is this shroud matches up perfectly. The blood that was stained on this shroud, the images that are on this shroud match up exactly with the gospel story of how Jesus Christ himself was crucified.
And friends, this is where, too, you also need to know what some of the objections are. There are those who claim that the Shroud of Turin is the greatest, most elaborate hoax of all time. But what we see reflected in this image is very unique, and it's unique meaning one of a kind because it reflects what we read about, what's embedded in the gospel narratives about the brutal ways in which Jesus was beaten, the way that he experienced flagellation, the scourging, and of course, ultimately his death by Roman crucifixion. You can see right there 372 individual wounds. We're going to get to this, and we have a lot more where this is coming. So the Shroud of Turin is an image in a linen cloth that Jesus was wrapped in by 2 members of the Sanhedrin, Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus. And in fact, Alan, this word shroud is a biblical word. A
lot of people don't know that.
When I first heard Shroud of Turin, what is that? And of course, we say Shroud of Turin now because it is located in the Piedmont, the northern district of the country of Italy. It's a beautiful place to visit. In the city of Turin, Italy. It's literally in the cathedral right now.
So what you're trying to say is that it's possible, and you believe, that the actual grave clothes of Jesus Christ himself are located in a place called Turin, Italy, and it's called the Shroud of Turin.
That is exactly what I'm saying. And I want you to know that I have changed my opinion entirely, and we're going to drop the 5 reasons why. I've gone from being a shroud skeptic to following what has the most explanatory power for me. I'm a critical thinker. That means that I'm going to follow where the evidence leads. I'm an evidentialist. And so when I talk about the shroud as well, we also have another photo, Alan. This is a superimposed photo, as we're going to see here in a few minutes, of what the actual linen garment looks like. It even has a herringbone weave. Now, you might be thinking, Alan, or someone that's watching it, there's no way we have a 2,000-year-old piece of cloth that was worn as a burial garment for Jesus. That just doesn't work in my worldview.
Right.
Well, perhaps you want to change your worldview. Again, did you know we have a much older garment? It's actually called the Tarkan dress. It's about 3,000 years older than Jesus's burial garment, which, Alan, means it's about 5,000 years old.
Which proves that these things hold up.
They could, given the right circumstances, last forever. But this Tarkan dress, which was found in the dry sands of Egypt, you can see very clearly that it is a garment that was worn. And guess what? It's 3,000 years older than the shroud. So I just want to set up the context. We're not talking about anything weird. Alan and I are not getting into some kind of Christian religious trance. We are following the breadcrumbs of evidence. So we want to invite you. Let us take you along by the hand to our top 5 reasons why we believe the Shroud of Turin is legit. And then, Alan, I think we're going to end on a crescendo, because not only are we going to discuss, is the shroud legit, but we're going to ask you the question, because we're going to discuss the question, is the crucified man in the shroud Jesus of Nazareth? That's an even bigger question.
All right. So you were getting ready to show us in the Gospels where the word shroud appears.
That's right. So
just so people know that this word shroud is actually in the Bible.
Absolutely. It's in the Bible because it's recorded in all 4 Gospels. And in fact, we're going to bring up on the screen right now the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in the land of Israel, in the heart of the city of Jerusalem. Of course, it wouldn't have looked like this 2,000 years ago. It was a rock quarry on a main road on the way into the city of Jerusalem. That little house that's inside the church, that's called the Edicule, which is like a little venerated temple. It's a little house you can walk in. And in there, as we said in our Body of Proof video, is the 1st century slab that archaeologists believe is where the body of Jesus was laid after he was crucified. So we pick up the narrative right there. And Alan, in Matthew chapter 27, verses 57 to 61, Mark chapter 15, 42 to 47, Luke chapter 23, 50 to 56, and even in John's Gospel, chapter 19, verses 38 to 42, we read, then Pilate ordered the body to be given to Joseph of Arimathea. The Mishnah tells us that if the Sanhedrin condemned a criminal to crucifixion, it was on the Sanhedrin to be responsible for their burial. That's exactly what we're reading. But Joseph goes a step further. And Joseph, verse 59 of Matthew 27, took the body, he wrapped it in a, quote, clean linen shroud and laid it in his own new tomb. And that, my friend, is where the story of the shroud begins.
Okay, so guys, don't trust me. We are getting to the top 5 reasons, but we're trying to set it up, so just stay with us. But you and I were talking offline, and you mentioned that shrouds were not necessarily something cheap,
no,
right? That you could get just easy. It wasn't like just some sort of cloth that you could just like use to like wash your dishes with or something like that. Like, this is an expensive piece of way to kind of wrap a body, which is consistent with the fact that it makes sense that Joseph of Arimathea, who was a rich man, would have been able to have the resources available to even purchase something that had a herringbone pattern, a shroud like this, that is able to last a couple thousand years.
Had it ready, because remember, if you and I are Jews and someone we cared about or someone we were responsible for died, they had to be buried before nightfall. Jesus dies around 3 p.m. April 5th, April 3rd, AD 33. They have to bury him before sundown. Guess who not only has a new tomb that he's volunteered, but in his own personal death planning, he had purchased an elaborate, elegant, expensive burial shroud that he was going to use for himself. He had it available for Jesus of Nazareth.
All right, guys. So guys, this is probably one of my most exciting aspects of this conversation today. So we've talked about what is a shroud. We've talked about specifically why the Shroud of Turin is of particular interest to us, because we believe it's the grave clothes of Jesus Christ that has an embedded image, a 3D image of the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, which we're going to get into. But how is it possible before cameras, before iPhone, before cell phones, before any of these things, how could we have gotten an image like we see on the screen right here of what we believe is the crucified man, Jesus Christ? Or even if it's not Jesus Christ, it's a crucified man of someone, but we believe it's Jesus Christ. How do we believe that this image actually was generated?
Well, another way to say it, for those of you that are watching maybe with students, Steve Jobs was not the first dude to take a selfie when he invented the front-facing camera with the iPhone in 2010. Friends, did God take a selfie when this incredible act happened at the moment of resurrection, where suddenly an image is embedded? Now, check this out, Alan. We actually have a 3D image. This is a 3D computer model rendering of the Shroud of Turin. Now, look closely at it. Notice that scientists actually say, notice that there's topographical, there's a topography, there are features that you just would not find for any photographer watching who's used to a darkroom, and we'll, of course, get to that in a few minutes. But scientists have speculated if it was some kind of bolt of light, it would have could have had the power to cause something of this magnitude in a linen shroud. 2,000 years, by the way, 1,800 years before the first picture was taken, it would have taken the amount of energy of 6.4 gigawatts.
That takes me back to my Back to the Future days.
1.21 gigawatts. Listen. A gigawatt is a lot of power, and scientists say just to generate that kind of power, to leave that kind of image or impression, now we're going to get more detailed, it would just take 6.4. So the big question is, if it is authentic, Alan, how did it happen? And that is something that has been stunning scientists and archaeologists, theologians, and even those who are experts in cinematography and photographs. That is the big question. How did it happen?
Wow. Okay. So guys, just once again, I hope you guys are seeing there's some amazing images here that are taken directly from the shroud. So with all that being said, let's not keep the people waiting. We're going to count down, guys, from 5 to number 1. And you want to stay tuned, because number 1 is the most convincing reason why we believe that the Shroud of Turin is indeed the actual grave clothes of Jesus Christ. So reason number 5 is what?
What changed my view from skeptic of shroud to actually being a shroud believer, to find it so persuasive, is number 5. The Turin shroud is the most studied archaeological artifact in the world. Okay. Now, let's let that set up for a minute. I mean, I've been to museums all over the world. The Pergamon Museum in Berlin, Germany. I've been to the Shrine of the Book in Jerusalem. I've been to beautiful museums that have amazing artifacts all over the world that nobody questions. When we look at the Shroud of Turin, it's not only the most studied artifact of all time, it's the most cross-disciplinary studied artifact of all time. We're not talking about a bunch of theologians, and we respect the theologians who have taken a look at this.
Wow.
We are talking about weapons specialists from Los Alamos Laboratories, the atom bomb folks, rocket science. The greatest modern science tools that we have at our disposal have been utilized and deployed when studying the Turin Shroud. So, friends, if it was a hoax, individuals who have no particular theological bias or hopes, they would have stepped forward and said, this thing is totally fake. In fact, Ray Rogers, and God rest his soul, who became really the guardian of the shroud, he is a chemist. When he's on the original stirrup team that, as we'll see here in a few minutes, was one of the original scholars called on to go examine the shroud. He said, give me 20 minutes. That's all it's going to take me. I'm a chemist. Give me 20 minutes and I will show you this is the greatest hoax of all time.
Wow.
He changed his view and literally died as one of the guardians of shroud research.
Very interesting.
So, and friends, I also want to share this because I come, and I'm thankful to come from an evangelical background. But one of the issues that I've had in some of my training, I have 2 master's degrees and a PhD. I have been the victim. I feel robbed in some way, Alan. I hope you don't mind me being transparent with your audience, because I have a PhD on the physical bodily resurrection of Jesus. I'm an expert in what's called tradition history of resurrection belief and the Judeo-Christian motif. in all of my readings. That means I have to have great control of the secondary literature, the scholarly literature, the primary resources. People just kind of tipped around the shroud with me. And I wasn't the critical thinker that I needed to be. And so I was affected by it. And I was even affected by some in the evangelical tradition who would say, Jeremiah, JJ, that's just some Catholic thing. You know, don't certainly, you know, you're not looking into some Catholic thing, are you? And so I actually want to put up a slide here. This is kind of 5B. It's not a Catholic relic. This was held by private families for hundreds of years, and it was left to the Pope in 1985. And so until 1985, the Catholic Church had nothing to do with the Shroud of Turin. So I just want to make sure if you might have been impacted as I was or influenced, saying, hey, don't look further into the shroud. That's just some weird Catholic thing. I mean, for example, I led a Reformation tour to the land of Germany. And I remember we stopped and we went to the cathedral in Cologne, Germany, where they have 3 relics. They claim the 3 wise men are buried there. Well, there's no history backing that up. Friends, there's a massive difference between the relic of the 3 wise men buried in the Cologne Cathedral versus the scientists that have looked at the Shroud of Turin. In fact, Alan, we have pictures of them. This is the team that's called the Stirrup Team, the Shroud of Turin Research Project, who in 1978 were given unprecedented access, flown to Turin, Italy. Most of them were skeptical. And I want to send a shout out again to our friend Barry Schwartz, who was the photojournalist, the photo documentarian, who, by the way, why was he asked? He was working on top secret confidential photographs for Los Alamos Laboratories, working on atom bomb imaging. And after that job was done, they called back, and he's self-employed. So he's like, great, they're hiring me again. And the guy on the other end of the line said, have you heard of the Shroud of Turin? And Barry said, well, I'm Jewish. I don't care about that. And
so
the guy
just to be clear, he didn't have any bias.
No bias.
To want to go and prove.
Well, his bias was he thought it was a joke. He said, this will be a free trip to Italy. So again, they go, I want to give you the context, Alan. It's 1978. The shroud at this time is on display. One thing that our audience may find interesting, the shroud is not just always on display in perpetuity. It is a 2,000-year-old artifact. So even at the time of this recording, it is not on display. You can see a facsimile if you're in Turin, Italy right now, but it goes on display from time to time. And it happened to be on display in 1978. Check out this photo. 100,000 people a day.
Wow.
Are standing in line. Now, thankfully, today, when it does go on display, you can set a reservation, so you don't have to stand all day in a crowd. But I just want to give you something of what was in the milieu. I mean, this was an exciting thing. So the scientists get there. We have actual images. Again, these are from Barry Schwartz. You can see, as I already mentioned, Alan, it's 14 feet wide by 4 feet. They were so careful, they actually created a stainless steel table so they could magnetize with Teflon magnets the shroud against this stainless steel table. So, a lot of people, by the way, scientists, curators, paleologists, they actually hurt the artifact while they're testing it. And so these individuals were so careful. Again, these are mainly rocket scientists. They're careful not to hurt the artifact. And so they do some phenomenal research on it. And so again, friends, we're not just talking about a few Christians. This isn't some odd video we saw somewhere that is fake news. It is the most studied artifact of all time. And so, Alan, if it was a hoax, I feel like there would be a chorus of cross-disciplinary scholars saying, hey, this isn't legit. Don't waste your time with it.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, because at first I was like, well, why would that be a reason why you believe that this is true? But guys, think about it. If only 3 or 4 people studied this and said, oh, you know what? We don't find this to be a hoax, then you'd be like, well, okay, you know what? Why would we believe these 3 or 4 people? But if it's been studied over and over and over and over again, once again, as you mentioned, by not just Christian theologians, but by theologians who are not Christian, right? Because there are some people who are theologians, they're not Christian. Theologist means a study of God. People who are of scientists, people who are of different, people who study blood, people who study these things. And all of them are coming together, and no one up to this point is able to show that it is a hoax. So that's the 5th reason. Let's count down number 4.
Number 4, why do I think that the Shroud of Turin is authentic? Science today still, and I'm talking about 21st century scientists, modern science cannot explain how this image is in the cloth. And in fact, there is a professor friend of ours from Trinity Western University, and he was an atheist philosopher. And it was this aspect of the Shroud of Turin that caused him to go from skeptic atheist to sold out believer in Jesus Christ, Alan, because there's something interesting that happens when the shroud, you have to stand back about 8 or 9 feet to be able to see it.
Yeah, that's interesting.
When you go within, so under a shorter distance, under 8 feet, the shroud vanishes.
Wow, I wonder.
We can't explain this. So science today can't explain how the image is in the shroud. And I want to show you again a close-up of this Shroud of Turin. This is in the royal palace where they're studying it. And then boom, when I say science can't explain it, look at all these scientists in this image. They are studying it. We're talking about supersonic.
The greatest minds of the world.
The greatest minds with the best equipment. And they studied it for hours, well, years actually, but they were with the shroud. They had 5 days of 24-hour periods to do anything they wanted with the shroud in the royal palace. So much so they had to sleep there, Alan. I mean, they had 5 days. And I mean, check out, when I say scientists, they had to create equipment. Just the innovation of the equipment and how the methodology with which they studied the shroud has been applauded. And so, friends, when we say science can't explain, that we are updating it. As of the time of this video, there are no scientists. First off, no one's claiming it's a hoax, but they stop short. They can tell you what it isn't, but at the end of the Stirrup project, they could say there is no pigment. So that means there's no coloring. There's no,
because people could say that it's been painted on, or
there's no
something.
paint or tattooed. There's no pigment. There's no image property that we have. And in fact, they took a palette of colors of every kind of color. And by the way, the shroud has survived 3 different fires. It's been doused with water on at least 2 occasions. So you think about if it was a painting or if it was some kind of weird tattooed pigment, you would see effects from the fires, right?
Right.
And yet there's no bleeding. The image is still there. How do you explain this? And so, again, there's just some great images of, and again, the report first came out in 1981, and there's been several since then. So that's number 4, scientists. And this is a biggie. This is number 1 for a lot. It's not my number 1, but for many of these skeptics turned believers in the authenticity of the shroud, it's the fact that it's been studied and science just cannot explain how that image is there. In other words, you can't come up with a forgery if you even wanted to. So let that sink in.
Wow. Now, I don't know if you're going to talk about this a little bit later as far as the blood on the blood type.
Yes.
On the shroud.
I haven't got to my top reasons yet. I'm just
we're
building my case for you, Alan. I'm building my case.
Thank you. Okay. All right. Well, with that being said, we're not going to steal any thunder, but I did put a teaser in there for you guys because it's a very interesting thing we're going to take a look at. But let's look at reason number 3 as we count down 5, 4, 3. What is the third reason why you believe that the Shroud of Turin is not a hoax? Is the actual grave clothes of Christ, and it contains the very image of the face and the body and the punishment and the crucifixion of Christ?
Well, Alan, again, this one's astonishing to me, and I keep using that descriptor adjective because the 1988 radiocarbon, that's C14, that's the way things are dated in the scientific community, radiocarbon or carbon-14 dating, has been authoritatively shown to be utterly unreliable. In fact, there are no less than 6 peer-reviewed journal articles that call into question the 3 laboratories that carried out the only radiocarbon dating, which happened in 1988 on the Shroud of Turin. And I want to just call out, I have a few apologist friends who have discounted the Shroud of Turin because of this point. So I want to be very transparent. I love these brothers. They're wrong because they have not actually read the peer-reviewed journal articles. In fact, one is extremely prominent, who wrote an entire article about, based on the radiocarbon dating, it's a hoax. Well, let's talk about that radiocarbon dating.
What is that even? What is that for people who may not even know
Absolutely.
what C14 and radiocarbon dating is?
You take, so it does destroy it, but you take a sample of an artifact and then you subject it to what's called radiocarbon dating, and that gives you a fairly accurate date range. And without geeking out too much, I would encourage you to watch a YouTube video on radiocarbon dating. But all you need to know is it's a standard in the physical sciences of how you can date artifacts. Now, by the way, we don't use it in biblical scholarship because it destroys the fragments that we have of the Bible. So we rely on paleography, handwriting styles, and other things. So when I look at this radiocarbon dating, I want to just remind you it happened in 1988. 3 laboratories carried it out. By the way, the British Museum, for 27 years after this, would not release the raw data from the C14 dating. So just let that sink in. If we're all on a quest for truth, if we're truth addicts, you're going to let the world have the raw data. And by the way, the British Museum was complicit with this, and even I would use the word culpable in this. They wouldn't release the raw data until a law expert who happens to also be fascinated by the Shroud of Turin got them to release the raw data from the carbon-14 dating 27 years later. So are you beginning to feel a little bit of the bias,
conspiracy, or wanting
Absolutely.
to hide?
Just like, hey, let's get it out there. And so the results of this dating gave a date range that the shroud was only 700 years old. And let me be precise, according to the C14 dating, it would be dated to AD 1260 to 1390. So in that 12th to 13th century era.
So we'll make sure everybody understands that. So what this dating came back to say
that it was medieval
was that this could not have been the actual grave clothes of Christ, because this is dating back to about 1300 years after Christ was even buried. So this cannot belong to Christ.
Right.
But
it's a medieval forgery is what the carbon-14 revealed. But check this slide out. So this is where we actually have to be. And Alan, this is why I love The Beat. This is why I love your new book. This is why we have to be careful Christian thinkers. Listen, learn from everybody, but don't let anyone think for you. Learn how to think for yourself critically and Christianly about your faith. So I was influenced by this certain apologist who discounted it until I saw this. Check out this slide. Now I have to use my magnifier. I have this handy dandy magnifier on. Now they took the very bottom left corner. Do you all see that magnifier? The bottom left corner was taken as a sample for the 3 laboratories that tested the C14 dating. Now, here's the problem. The shroud has been repaired over the years. I mentioned earlier that the shroud has sustained fire damage on 3 different occasions. In fact, Alan, do you see these like triangles? They look like ups. Those are patches. Because the shroud was destroyed, it was folded in 4. So like you would fold a blanket or what I call an Afghan, you would fold it up to where it was in 4 quadrants. And then that's why you see mirrored here that those are the fold lines. So
that's where the fire.
So they had to patch it. Exactly. They also patched in the boundary lines or the sides. And so when I realized that they didn't like take from the chest area of Jesus, okay?
Which makes sense why they wouldn't want to do that.
They don't want to destroy it further.
Yeah, I mean.
But there were cotton fibers woven in, which was a dead giveaway that the carbon-14 tests did not reflect the original shroud, but they tested the patched areas. And guess what? That's when they would have patched it, after one of the fires from the 1300s. Now, here's another reason, again, and this is something that I want to put my hat on and say I have an expertise in dating previously undated artifacts that the provenance, that means where they come from, is in question. If the Shroud of Turin is truly dated at its earliest to the 1200s, why do we have 75 years earlier a codex, which, Alan, all that means is that's a book as opposed to a scroll. A codex is a book. There's writing on the recto and verso, the front and back of the pages. Why do we have the Hungarian Prayer Codex, which has a naked Jesus drawn, which, by the way, for any art history individuals, you have facility in art, you know that medieval art of Jesus never paints him naked. The European medieval Jesus is effeminate, short, weak, fair-skinned, and then boom, you have this Hungarian Prayer Codex that does not fit the era of art. We have a naked Jesus. His body, showing the Latin term rigor mortis, is bent and folded and hunched in all the right places. Furthermore, do you see the herringbone? Someone drew that, Alan. And by the way, do you see the L-shaped holes right here? Let me use my magnifier. There's one. It's in an upside down L shape.
Yep.
Those are burn holes from when it was folded. It was used almost like a tablecloth in worship. So again,
that's very interesting.
I have to ask myself as a critical thinker, who got this drawing if it's 75 to 100 years before the shroud was forged?
Okay, so let me make sure I understand that. All right,
Yeah.
because all right, so what you're saying is that this Hungarian drawing that we have here is definitely dated 75
1191.
1191, right? So what you're saying is that if the shroud originated in 1260 or whatever, then how would they have been able
Impossible
to draw
with the detail
in vivid detail a replica or a
Right.
painting, a picture of the shroud, if it had not yet been, if it wasn't in existence until 1260, which 70 some years later, for them
At
to
its
have drawn
earliest.
this, which means they would have had to have access to it at the time, which proves that the carbon dating could not have actually been correct.
Right. And so I believe in Occam's razor. I believe in what has the most explanatory power, what makes the most natural sense. And again, if we were inventing it, we wouldn't paint a naked Jesus. We wouldn't paint the Jesus with the scourge marks, the burn holes, everything we see reflected from the Shroud of Turin.
All right. Wow.
We're going. Yeah.
Yes.
Anybody changing their views or at least open to it? Listen, one of the aspects of being someone who has a careful faith is you're willing to change your mind.
Yeah.
You're willing to be educated. You're willing to be challenged to think deeper. You appreciate your past, where you came from. We appreciate our spiritual mentors. But man, I'm addicted to truth. I'm on a quest for truth. So
Amen.
are we ready to go to the top two?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, what is the second reason why we believe that the Shroud of Turin, I'm going to keep saying this, is the actual grave clothes of Jesus Christ with an embedded image of the crucified Christ?
And why do I think it's authentic and not a hoax? Number two, this one, buckle your seatbelts for, okay? The VP8 image analyzer that was used by these weapons scientists revealed that the image in the shroud has a three-dimensional topographic quality.
Ooh, I can't wait for you to break this one down.
All right, friends, this is a VP8 image analyzer. By the way, I want to give out a shout of recognition as well to the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C. They had a beautiful Shroud of Turin exhibit recently where people got to see this VP8 analyzer. This isn't a Christian machine, okay?
Right. With a Christian bias.
Yeah, it doesn't care what images are inserted in it. It just makes a reading of any image of what you can see. Does the image, and it tracks 8 shades of gray. So if you're like me from the 8-bit Nintendo generation, you might know what I mean when I say 8-bit. It tracks,
Ooh, man, that's
it
funny.
just simply shows where the image is darker, there's more density. When it's lighter, there's less density, okay? It's just showing a density based on light shades, okay? And it wasn't even used originally for the shroud. By the way, I want to fix one thing. It was not used to map by NASA. NASA never used this. There's a lot of, by the way, that's why you need to watch this video and share it as much as you can. There's a lot of really weird, bad information out there on the shroud. Like this is the same machine we use to map the moon. No, that's not true. Mm-hmm. This was used in these weapons laboratories. And so check out what happens when the Shroud of Turin, the black and white photo was inserted. Notice that the image takes on these 3D qualities where we can actually detect, and there's a spatial difference. I'm going to show you this. So obviously, if the shroud linen is against your face, but it's not against your Adam's apple. So do you see how it goes flat there? So there is not as dense of light in that image. So the light picks up where there's density. We can actually see the blood. We can see the hands folded, 4 fingers. Why? Because the thumbs are in rigor mortis. And so this image right here is what caused all the scientists to go to study the shroud in 1978. I want to make sure you get the chronology. This photo is actually from the 1930s. It's not even the best photo we have. This right here is what caused them to question, hey, a normal photograph doesn't look that way. In fact, I have a picture of a normal photograph that goes through a VP8 image scanner that checks the 8 degrees of black and white, etc. And you can see it's a garbled image. It's not detailed like the uniquenesses of the Shroud of Turin. This is an even more helpful slide. Now, when we go even better technology now, when we look at the image on the left that's enhanced, that actually has more shades than just the VP8, the 8-bit shades from the 1970s, look at that on the left. You immediately see the 3D image of Jesus. And it took me a minute to even figure out what this meant or why that was important. But this is the catalyst that caused all these scientists, cross-disciplinary scientists, from what I understand, outside of the priests who were there, no theologians were there. These were rocket scientists that were there. These were experts from labs who understood the best photography of their day. Notice that you can see it has a 3D quality to it. And so I want to just say this is my number 2 because, again, no other photo does this. And yet a 2,000-year-old linen garment does.
Wow. Very, very interesting. So what are we looking at here?
So here is a sculpture that was made in the 1960s by a very astute artist who noticed that this image has this topography. It has a chemistry to it, a physics to it, and he literally created a sculpture just based on what they discovered in the VP from the VP8 analyzer. I think this is just phenomenal, and we see the accuracy there of the face of Jesus as it's reflected in the shroud.
All right, guys. This is the moment I've been waiting for.
Okay, let's go.
Put your seatbelts on, guys. If this isn't clinch it, if this doesn't bring it home, I don't know what will, but this is exciting. So, number 1 reason why you believe that the Shroud of Turin is authentic.
The Shroud of Turin is legit because all data, and I don't use all lightly as a historian, all the data, excluding the C14 dating of the lower left quadrant of the shroud, which includes the floral, the numismatic, the textile, the archaeological, the hematological, the fabric, and the historical data point to a much earlier origin, which helps us because it exhibits, here's the key word for the viewer, verisimilitude with the world of Jesus. Everything we see reflected in the crucified man in the Shroud of Turin is what we would expect if we saw an image of a crucified man from the 1st century in Judaica. Everything we see on this reflects a 1st century death of a crucified man.
And I'll even go a step further. Does it also reflect the exact account in the Gospels of the crucifixion story of exactly how Jesus was crucified?
The Gospels tell us that Jesus, that is a great question, was crucified in an exceptionally brutal manner, so much so that he only survived on the cross for 6 hours, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Now, what's fascinating to me is crucified victims, even in the 1st century, normally lasted a couple of days. But the extra brutality with which Jesus died forces him to die on the cross much earlier than expected. So let's check out what we see in the shroud, because you remember in the Gospels, Alan, his legs didn't have to be broken because they were shocked that he was already dead. Mm-hmm. We hear that in the Gospels. By the way, I want to quote Jody Magnus, the atheist archaeologist, University of North Carolina. She's an expert in Jesus and Judaica archaeology. Discoveries from the material culture. She's the one who said, as an atheist, she doesn't have a bias towards Christianity. She said the Gospels get it right when you study the death of Jesus. So the question is, does the shroud reflect that? And I'm saying all the data points to exhibiting a correspondence with that.
So, real quick question. Why was it important for, this is just a random question, but why was it important? I know the answer. I want them to, why was it important for them to try to break your legs when they were trying to crucify someone?
To hasten your death. After about 3 days, people, would stop wanting to see this because, a lot of bad things are happening to your body. It was the most agonizing way to die because you did not have any of your vital organs penetrated. You literally died from blood loss or asphyxiation, fatigue, dehydration, malnutrition. So if they broke your legs, you just couldn't breathe anymore.
And you couldn't hold yourself up.
It was a kill shot.
Right.
It ended the pain.
And what's interesting is that, Jesus fulfilled the prophecy in the Old Testament where it talks about his legs were not broken. And then that's fulfilled in the Gospels where it talks about they didn't break his leg.
Do we also see that reflected in the shroud?
That's
the question. And this is why, again, as a historian, for me, if it walks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, I'm going to follow where the evidence leads. So what does this word verisimilitude mean? It is a Latin word that if you're a Christian thinker, listen, we can level up our vocabulary. It's okay to do that. This is a word that historians and archaeologists appreciate. It's Latin for veritas. I'm sure Alan's used that word here on this channel before, for truth. It's genuine. It corresponds with reality. Similitude means it's similar, or it's what we should expect of that time period. Remember, truth isn't hard to define. Truth corresponds with reality. And so if I'm looking at an artifact, it should exhibit verisimilitude from the material culture of what we would expect in the time of Jesus. And so what do we see that's especially unique about the shroud? Let's check this out. This is my number one reason.
This blows my mind.
Again, I want to thank Barry Schwartz. These aren't some Google images we just ripped off. We are using images from the photographer himself, who was pictured earlier in point number 5 in our countdown. Here we have the actual blood. In the image, there's a lot of blood, friends. This is not a PG-13. This is how it really was, which was R. Jesus died in an especially brutal fashion. We don't see some kind of crown of thorns, sweatband. No, he wore a helmet of thorns, a helmet. So those thorns would have stuck his head, not just his forehead, all over. And so what do we see reflected in the shroud here? It's fascinating to me because they have enhanced in the photographic negative the facial image, which also shows the blood stains, which are highlighted in red. And again, it reminds me, if you don't mind, just a parenthetical spiritual note of Ephesians 1:7, that in Jesus we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sins in accordance with the riches of his grace.
So what you're saying is that reflected on the actual grave clothes, the shroud of Jesus Christ, right around the head or helmet area, there are splotches of blood
all over
that would correspond to blood that we would expect to come down your face if your head was penetrated with a crown or a helmet of thorns.
That is correct, Alan. And again, the other 2 criminals who died next to Jesus did not have a crown of thorns. They were mocking our Lord and Savior. They called him a blasphemer. Why can't you save yourself? And so again, this is where the shroud intersects perfectly with the gospel narratives, because you didn't fashion a crown of thorns for every crucified victim. There was something especially sadistic about the executioners mocking Jesus.
That makes sense.
This is the golden moment here. Let's get to this image, okay? Because this really helps me. I'm a visual learner.
You may be too. Earlier.
Yeah. Alan showed this in the introduction, and I want to point out with Alan some features, and Alan, pipe in all you feel led. But what's fascinating to me, we've already pointed out the wounds that are consistent with the crown of thorns. Let me use my magnifier on Jesus's forehead. There is, do you see that, Alan, right there? And those of you that are watching, it looks like almost a number 3. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Well, that is a major wound of blood, a major gash on his forehead. We don't know how it happens, but the crucified man in the shroud not only, of course, has the highlights of the blood from around the thorn, but he's sustained a brutal injury to his forehead. And I'm going to show you here in a few minutes how that looks on the shroud today. Because the blood, and Alan Adler, you were asking about the blood. It's fascinating. Some people will look at that and say, oh, you know, the blood is normally black, old blood, but why is this blood not black? Well, it's red. Now, it's not like a bright red, okay? Don't think like a magic marker red, but I mean, it's definitely reddish, which is unique. And Alan Adler, who studied the blood on the Shroud of Turin research project, using all the means that were available to him, postulated it's type AB blood, which again is extremely rare, 3% male blood. It's Semitic. Jesus was a Jew. But what's interesting is there was a high concentration of bilirubin in the blood, which according to Dr. Adler, when your body experiences massive trauma, the bilirubin is released, which causes it to keep that red color, which is why it's stained in red on the shroud. Now, I know we're covering a lot here, but
yeah,
what else do you see on here, Alan?
Well,
that sticks out to you? There's so many things.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the swollen, bruised cheek.
Yeah.
You know, the Gospels talk about that they beat him and they punched him and they struck him. So that would make sense that, you know, why his cheek would be bruised and swollen. 372 individual wounds, which, guys, you know, look, I know this is a very intellectual, academic video, but guys, this is the moment where I want you guys to really take in, because when we start thinking about the sacrifice that Jesus Christ made on the cross for you, and I want to look right in the camera and tell you guys this. Look, guys, this is why we give our lives to this. This is why we serve God to the capacity that we do. This is why we deny ourselves of what we want. This is the reason why we just kill our flesh. This is the reason why we do all these things, because we're not serving, you know, a God who didn't demonstrate his love for us, right? The Bible says in Romans 5:8, but he demonstrated his love for us, and that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. It'd be one thing if he just took a gun to the head, or they took a pill or something like that, and he said, okay, I died for you, right? That's not pain, that's not suffering. But the fact that Jesus was willing to go through this level of pain and suffering for you and I proves his love. The question is, are we proving our love for him? 372 lacerations. Think about the flogging, the scourging, the whipping, and all those things, which he's going to talk about and show a little bit about what they used to do this flogging, guys. It's just unbelievable. The spear wound puncturing the lung. Talk about that.
Well, yeah, and if I may, Alan, you know, some of us were like Thomas, the doubter, Didymus, the twin. Unless I see the nail prints in his arms, unless I see his wounds, friends, the Shroud of Turin is giving you just that. Let that sink in for a minute. 372 lacerations. It's remarkable because we actually have the backside as well of the crucified man. The flagellation, that's the Roman term. The whipping he experienced goes from his neckline past his calf muscles. And so when you think about that passage, by his stripes we're healed, there were, by this count, 2,000-year-old image, 372 individual wounds from what we can tell. His entire body was wounded. And the lance, the spear wound, I'm going to again use my magnifier, pops up right here. So the crucified man sustained a spear wound in his side that penetrated to his heart. Now, Alan, what does that sound like? Does that sound familiar to you from the Gospels?
Yeah, absolutely.
That was not typical. That was not the typical way. Romans wanted to extend the excruciating impact of crucifixion as long as possible. And again, you don't have to just listen to us. Martin Hengel, a great German scholar, Martisch, in this book, The Cross of the Son of God, he points out that the most detailed record we have from antiquity about Roman crucifixion comes none other from the New Testament Gospels, which again, newsflash, he thinks are historical documents. Now, I don't even know if he was an evangelical or not. I know he's a historical Jesus scholar, and he's saying the Gospels give us the most detailed account of crucifixion from the Roman Empire of late antiquity. And what we see here reflected in the shroud, again, smacks of authenticity. We see, again, you see the bilirubin, as I already mentioned, in the bottom left. The abrasions on the shoulder are fascinating to me.
Yes, I was getting ready to say that was the one that I was like, we got to hit that, right?
Yeah.
So why would there possibly be any bruises or abrasions on the shoulder of the crucified Christ? I mean, where did that possibly come from?
This is where I have a lot of fun with my college students, telling them I'm an expert in execution. I mean, that's a lot of fun because the crucified victim in the Roman Empire was forced to carry the patibulum, which was the crossbar of the cross. It weighs, give or take 10 or 20, it weighed around 60 pounds. And you think, no big deal. Can you imagine? Remember, Jesus wasn't beaten once, he was beaten twice. He was beaten once in the house of Caiaphas. Then they turned him over to the Roman guard at Praetorium, where he experienced unlimited lacerations. Remember, Jewish law said 40 lashes minus 1. Rome did not have a limit on the amount of lashes that you could experience. So again, these are, I'm just oozing. I mean, this is the area that I've given my life to study. And so listen, when I look at the correspondence of the evidence of the crucified man. And by the way, friends, I have the benefit of the modern science of archaeology. If this was a medieval forgery, they don't know anything about Roman crucifixion. Archaeology hasn't been invented for another 500 years. So just let that, they would have gotten everything wrong about the shroud. The fascinating thing about the shroud is it gets everything right about Jesus. And here's something we didn't mention earlier. It matches the oldest images that we have from Jesus from the 5th century, the 400s, and the Byzantine Empire. So it matches the earliest depictions that we have of Jesus. So this image, again, now we're in the abdomen area, okay? And we see that it's visible. That's his hands at the very top. They're folded. Now, again, something else. Again,
zoom in on those hands just so people can see.
Let's do that. Great. Yeah.
So it might be hard finding these things.
So the hands are crossed. And by the way, we know from the shroud that Jesus was right-handed. He was right hand dominant. And you see right there that the Roman nails went through the wrist. Now, when I say that, don't think it's like, if you don't mind holding out your hand, don't think it's like way down here. The crucified victim, it went right at the heel of the palm through the wrist, and that could sustain the body weight of the crucified man, which, by the way, they also get the dimensions of his body right. I don't think we've mentioned this yet. The crucified man is 6 feet tall, which is fascinating because a medieval forger would have thought Jesus to be about 5'8", a little bit taller than the average man, which was 5'6". The crucified man is nearly 6 feet tall, weighing in at 154 pounds. Now, if you were crucified in your palm, it's not going to be able to sustain your body weight. But they were experts at execution. And back in our shocking top 10 video of archaeological discoveries, I showed you the heel bone of poor old Yehohanan, who was also crucified through his heel bone. Well, we see this consistently right here in this beautiful picture. In fact, the next image allows us to give a close-up of the nail in the feet. Wow. We can actually see the pooling blood. By the way, let's get to that broken leg. Notice this. No evidence of broken legs. It would be evident if the legs were in fact broken. Again, there's abrasions all over the legs.
Guys, do you realize that if any one of these things that we see in the shroud were inconsistent with the gospel story, the whole thing would be a hoax.
It's a house of cards.
If the legs were broken, it's a house of cards. The legs were broken. Well, it was a good try. It was a fun. It was fun. It was a fun conversation. But we clearly know the Bible says his legs weren't broken. The shroud shows broken legs, therefore throw it out. But each one of these things is so consistent, which is unbelievable.
And by the way, I promised to show you the picture of the blood. This is the actual superimposed E-shaped blood stain on the forehead of the man of the Shroud of Turin, viewed with transmitted light. The neck, it's just incredible to me when I see this. That's where I mention the blood we would expect to be blackish, but because of the trauma, Adler hypothesized and believed that the release of bilirubin is what caused it to stay red because he was under so much duress. Just some footnotes. Here's those burn stains. Again, it would have been folded in 4 different ways because it's 14 feet long by 4 feet. So, you got to fold this thing up. It's sustained. People thought, some, I believe, think that it was used as a tablecloth during worship. And so there's burn stains. Again, these are also evident in the Hungarian Pray Codex. We see those burn stains. Alan, I do want to show this image as well because this actually shows the close-up of the spear wound. Again, you can see very clearly the patchwork, by the way. Do you see the seams?
Oh, now
so this is the patchwork, those triangles. So just try to, that was from the fire. They tried to fix it. But it's interesting. Notice where the burns are. If this was pigment or paint, it would have bled. This is where Barry Schwartz said, I can tell in 10 minutes if this is a forgery. No, that is blood stained from the scourge wound. It's fascinating. Then we see it over here as well on the side, on both the black and white and then the superimposed image. What does that blood look like in microscopic examination? And again, we're looking, for those of you that might be just joining us, the herringbone pattern of the burial clothes of Jesus. This, again, shows that the fibers reflect the blood. And these are these very miniature fibers that's within the woven herringbone burial cloth.
This is very emotional for me, guys. When you begin to think, look, when you grow up, how many songs did you sing in church about the blood of Jesus Christ?
Amen.
Right?
Nothing
I
but
know
the
it
blood.
was the blood, nothing but the blood. The blood came, all the guys.
What can wash away my sin?
Nothing but the blood of Jesus. Is it possible?
What can make me whole again?
Nothing but the blood of Jesus. You're going to make me have a praise song.
That's right.
Oh, Jesus.
Right.
Look,
I
guys,
love it.
this could be the actual blood that Jesus shed on the cross for you and I. It is this and nothing else that purchased our salvation.
That's right.
Just wrap your mind around that. Just absolutely fascinating.
This next picture I wanted to save till close to the end, and you can actually see the blood in the wrists right there. The same thing Thomas, the twin, would have seen. Again, you also see the blood, the scourging up and down his forearms. Was Jesus whipped just on the backside? No, he was whipped across the front of his body as well. Now, what was he whipped with, Alan? Again, these are, I don't want to go too long, so with your permission, I'll show this.
Please.
This is an artifact of the flagellation. These were 9 tails that would have bones or rocks, sharp edges, knotted, which would be sure to rip the flesh and then anything under the flesh from the body. It wasn't just a whip, but it dug and tore in and out of the body, and that's exactly what we see reflected in the shroud victim. And so, Alan, the big question for us is, as we close, is not only is it authentic, but do we believe the image of the crucified man in the Shroud of Turin is the historical Jesus? So that's the question we need to answer at this point.
Yeah. And I think another question is, if so, what does that mean for us? And what might that mean for you, depending upon where you're at on your journey of watching this video? You might be somebody who's not a Christian. You might be somebody who is a Christian. So talk a little bit about what that might look like for somebody who's watching this video. They're a skeptic. They're not a Christian, and they came across this particular video. What might this video do to help them on their journey?
Well, the implications of the shroud being authentic, and the implications that the crucified man is, in fact, the crucified Jesus of the Bible should give you hope, because it means it's all true, friend. It means there is grace available for you right now if you only do what the New Testament says, 200 times is all it takes to become a follower of Jesus, and that's simply to trust in him for your forgiveness of your sins, knowing that those sins were already paid for. The gospel isn't spelled do, like you need to go do something religious. It's spelled D-O-N-E, done. And so I want to encourage you, based on these facts, to do what that skeptic did from Trinity Western University in Canada. He went from skeptic to Christian in a moment. And I want to encourage you to do that. When I've spent the last 20 years studying Roman crucifixion. The shroud victim is crucified in the exact manner that the Jesus of our Bible was crucified, which leads me to believe absolutely we are looking at the face of Jesus in the image of the crucified man in the Shroud of Turin.
And guys, if you are a Christian and you're watching this, right, you're already convinced that Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. But if you're honest with yourself, you've been questioning your faith. You've been asking questions. You might even be watching this, and maybe you came across this video and it was God ordained because maybe you were at the point where you were trying to deconstruct your faith.
Yeah.
Because maybe you're saying this whole Christianity thing, there's a hoax. There's no proof. There's no real evidence. There's no real evidence. Guys, we're not suggesting that this shroud is, just this is the only thing, right?
Right.
I mean, that's the beautiful thing about Christianity. Christianity has the most evidence as it relates to any world religion. There's more evidence that points in the favor of Christianity and the Bible being true than any other world religion, hands down.
That's right.
And this shroud should add further evidence for you to say, you know what? Yes, I'm a Christian, but now I have even extra confidence to believe that this faith and this Jesus that I believe in is exactly who he said he was.
The other part is this is a tool for you. This is why thank you for watching this video, rewatching it. 99% of people in the world don't have time to find or even read the peer-reviewed scientific journal articles that we've referenced. This video is nice and tight for you to share, so please share it. Feel free to teach these 5 reasons why we're convinced the Shroud of Turin is authentic and why we believe it indeed is the face of Jesus, the first selfie.
Yeah, that's right. God took the first selfie. So guys, we've enjoyed making this video. It's been awesome. And let us know what questions you have in the comments. And just like we did in the last video, is there another topic that you may want us to do?
All right, that's it. Thank you. And on that note, let's see. I hope you guys got something out of it. And Daniel has a request for music.
I like the first video, Pastor, and I like this too. But the first video with Barry Schwartz,
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
finished
there's
that.
a lot. There's a lot of
Yeah, it's-
information, right? So
Yeah, that's really nice. The way he said he's a Jew, but he with that it is true. He was the one who really
yeah, so that's another one that you guys can watch.
yeah.
Barry Schwartz is that photographer that was
He
Jewish,
was there.
not even a believer,
Yes.
but was assigned to this project. So yeah, so it's all good, guys. This is again just to bring to your awareness of this shroud, this burial cloth, that if you want to do more research on it, it's there, it's out there. But this is to give you at least an awareness. It's on your radar, and you can be now mindful that it's out there. And so Manny or Princess, would you like to close us with a song?
I got the song.
You got the song. All right.
I got